Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and we've got a lot of celebrating to do over the next few weeks as we lead up to the 2018 season and the Eagles' defense of their first Super Bowl title, and we've got a lot to look forward to. We've got the raising of the banner that's going to be happening before opening night against the Falcons. We've got a few preseason games to get through before that, but before all that, we have something else to celebrate, and that's the career of one of the greatest Eagles of all times. Brian Dawkins is going into the Hall of Fame this weekend, and I just wanted to share a few of my thoughts about him, about what he meant to me as a fan, and I think what he meant to the team as well. I'm going to include a link up there in the corner to the rant I did a year and a half ago when he didn't get in on the first ballot Hall of Fame. I still think he should have gotten in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. The fact that he didn't, I think was a crime. The fact that they put a kicker in over him, you can watch me rant about that in that prior video. But one of the things that I said in that video that really sort of struck me that I didn't realize until I had saw someone had put it up, and it's still true today. There's only one player in NFL history that had 25 or more sacks, 25 or more interceptions, and 25 or more forced fumbles in their career, and that was Brian Dawkins. And that just goes to show the versatility that he had, that he could do a lot of different things from the safety position, and for that reason, he really transformed the position. There's going to be a couple other safeties coming up for eligibility soon. Ed Reed, I think, comes up this year. I think Troy Polamalu might be the year after that. And a lot of these guys, I think, owe a lot of the fact that they're probably going to get into the Hall of Fame, maybe even on the first ballot. They're going to owe a lot of that to Brian Dawkins and what he sort of did before them to sort of really sort of transform the position. It no longer became just a position where the guy was going to sit back in center field and sort of play basically the back end of a defense to make sure no one got deep. He was the guy that would come into the box and play the run. He would come off the edge and blitz. He did a lot of different things for this team, and it shows in his stats, and it's still true to this day that no one has all three of those stats for their NFL career. And for that, I think Brian Dawkins is one of the greatest safeties to ever play in this league. And for that reason, he absolutely deserves to go into the Hall of Fame. And I'm excited that that's finally going to happen for him this weekend. What I do want to do, though, is I want to talk sort of about some of the memories I had of Brian Dawkins, some of the plays that really stood out, and some things about him that really stood out. Basically, I'm going to be going in order of some of the probably the more memorable plays, and then at the end, I'll talk about some of the things that really stuck out about him as a player. When you talk about great plays that Brian Dawkins made in his career and ask Eagles fans, probably most Eagles fans, the one play they're going to go to immediately, and one of the plays that I think of automatically as well, is the play that he had against Alge Crumpler in the NFC Championship game when we played the Falcons and finally got over the hump to get to that Super Bowl 39 when we finally won in the 2004-2005 NFC Championship game. That hit against Alge Crumpler, I think, really sort of set the tone for that game. It was actually, I went back and checked, it had been 14-3, the Eagles were up, and the Falcons were driving. It was in the second quarter, and the Falcons actually ended up scoring. Alge Crumpler, some people forget this, but Alge Crumpler held on to the ball, and the Falcons got the ball at the 10-yard line, and they scored in like the next play or so to get it to 14-10, so they drew within 4 points. But after that hit and sort of the statement that that sent, the Falcons' offense did not go anywhere the rest of that game. They had, very few yards. They didn't score any more points after that. And the Eagles went on then to win the NFC Championship game 27-10 in one of the most memorable games I've ever attended. And that hit was a large part of it. And that's one of the memories that I have from that game that really sticks in my head as to, what really happened and how that game went down and how we ended up finally getting over the hump to get to the Super Bowl with that team, which had been such a frustrating thing for the seasons leading up to that. Second play that really sort of sticks out is another one from the playoffs a year before. In the 4th and 26 game against the Green Bay Packers, of course, they make the big 4th and 26 completion, but we actually that only ended up setting up the tying field goal in that game. We then had to go into overtime where the Packers actually won the toss, and Brett Favre, as Brett Favre is known to do, just decided to sort of chuck it up there and throw the ball off his back foot and let his, hopefully, on a wing and a prayer, hope his guy would make a play on it. And some people aren't going to criticize him for that because it almost ends up being like a punt. But the problem then is you don't have guys that are prepared to cover a punt like you do in punt coverage. And Brian Dawkins made him pay for that. He had a 35-yard return that got us, on the Packers side of the field. And just a couple plays later, David Akers hits the game winner to win that game and send us to the NFC Championship game where we ultimately lost to the Panthers. But that was the first playoff game at Lincoln Financial Field, and the win was absolutely set up by Brian Dawkins. Something I didn't realize until I was reading some of the stories that have been out this week about Brian Dawkins. As it stands right now, that is the second longest interception return in overtime in postseason history. The only one that was longer was actually a touchdown. So really, if you want to think about it, it's the longest non-touchdown return in postseason history that happened in overtime. So Brian Dawkins sort of set that up, makes the play, and like I said, the return is what really makes that play happen. The fact that it was an interception is more on Brett Favre. The fact that the return was as good as it was is all Brian Dawkins and what he was able to do. The third play I really remember is actually a play that doesn't count in the stat books, but it has to do with the division playoff game against the Falcons when it was the 2002 season, I believe, 2002-2003. So it was one of the last games at the Vet. It actually happened in our end zone where he just laid out a hit on Michael Vick. Michael Vick was going in, he was scrambling as he always did, and he scrambled, got out in the open field, was making a beeline for the end zone. Dawkins came over and slammed him. Now, I remember the hit. That's very memorable in my mind. Like I said, that's the end zone that we sat in at the Vet. So I remember that. What I didn't remember until I was going back and reading stuff about it was the fact that Vick actually landed in the end zone. So technically he scored a touchdown, but the whole play didn't count because there was a holding call on the Falcons offensive line and it got called back. But I do recall that hit, and I do think it affected Vick the rest of that game. You recall that's the year that Vick goes up to Green Bay and wins in the wild card, where no one gave them a chance to win up there in the cold weather. He goes up there, and so he's the rage of the NFL. And I think that hit really sort of sent him a message that, hey, we're not going to just, let you do whatever you want here. You're going to have to really pay the price if you're going to try and do that. So Dawkins really laid out that hit on him, and I think sent a message to Vick on that play. The next play I really remember that Brian Dawkins made was, it was an important game at the end of the 2003 season. We were fighting for home field advantage. We had to go down to Washington to play. I think it was like a Saturday night game or something like that in December. There was I forget the player's name, but he ended up getting out into the open field. Dawkins was there. And basically he did a suplex on the guy where he picked him up and slammed him down on his back. And like I said, I don't remember who the player was that he did it to, but I do recall that play. And once again, the physicality that Brian Dawkins brought to the game is just sort of something that's etched in my mind. And that's one of the plays that really underscores that. Another big play I remember him making was in the 2008 season against the Steelers. It was early in the season. We had a late Sunday afternoon game against them at the Link. And it was a defensive battle the whole way. The Steelers had the ball late in the game and would have been able to drive and score a touchdown to win that game. I think there was like 3 minutes left or something in the game. And Brian Dawkins makes this strip sack of Ben Roethlisberger where he just sort of goes flying through the air and knocks the ball out of Roethlisberger's hands that we end up then recovering. I think Dawkins may even recovered that fumble, and that ends up setting up or sealing the win. I think we ended up just getting a field goal out of that, and then that put the game, I think, out of reach, if memory serves me correctly. But that was another play where I just remember him basically giving his all to the game, where he just went flying through the air to try and get to Roethlisberger because Roethlisberger was getting ready to throw the ball, and Dawkins makes the play that ends up sealing the win against the Steelers, who would actually end up going on to be the eventual Super Bowl champs that year. And finally, the last play that really sort of I remember Dawkins making is his only touchdown on the offensive side of the ball. And that happened because it was on a fake punt against the Houston Texans. Once again, at the Vet. It was the first time the Eagles ever played the Texans. They were a brand new team. It was snapped to Brian Mitchell, who did a shovel pass to Brian Dawkins, who took it, I think I looked it up, it was 57 yards to the house to score a touchdown. Interesting fact that I read about that score this week when I was looking at all the stuff about Dawkins is the fact that that was actually a longer touchdown reception than any reception that an Eagles wide receiver would have that year. And that just sort of underscores just how bad our wide receivers were early in the Donovan McNabb years. That's when, we had the James Thrashes and the Todd Pinkstons of the world that sort of would come up small when it really mattered. And the fact that Dawkins had a touchdown reception that was longer than anything they had all season, I think really just underscores that. But that's another play I really remember from his career. Things I remember about Dawkins is the one thing that my cousin and I, we attended the Eagles games as season ticket holders for years, and the one thing we always used to sort of joke about was right before the game, they would have, after they were doing their warm-ups on the field, they would always have a pregame huddle right on the Eagles logo at midfield. And there was always two predictable things that would happen after that huddle, where they would all break. There was two guys. One guy would always be the first one back in the locker room, and there was another guy who was always the last one back in the locker room. The guy who was always last back in the locker room was Trey Thomas, because he'd just take his good old time walking from midfield into the locker room. The other guy who was always the first one back in the locker room because he was so fired up and he would just go charging for the locker room was Brian Dawkins. And I think that just once again sort of underscores the passion that he had, that he was so excited to get into that game and be ready to perform at the highest level that he could, that he had so much energy that he would just dart from midfield into the locker room, and he was always the first one back in the Eagles locker room after the initial warm-ups. Of course, the only other thing I can say about Dawkins is just the good human being he is. He's a great person. He's a great role model. I've heard him speak and give his spiritual testimony, and really he's just a man of God who really, I think, wants to do what's best for himself and his family, and serving his God and trying to make a difference in the world, to be a positive role model to individuals. You even saw some of that this week with him doing some of the interviews he did, talking about some of the struggles he's had to be human and really show his vulnerabilities, to say, hey, listen, even though it may have looked like I had everything together, I didn't. And people that are struggling, it's okay if you're struggling, but making sure that you're getting help and doing what you can to better yourself, and making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that are going to make sure that you're the best version of yourself, sort of like the way he did throughout his career and throughout his life. Just a couple other stats that I found interesting as I was looking at some stuff about Dawkins this week. And number one is the fact that he had 221 starts in his career in regular season games at safety position. There's only one other player in NFL history that's had more starts at safety than Brian Dawkins. So the longevity of his career is really remarkable as well, especially considering how physical he played the position. The other thing that I did not realize just how much of this, to a degree, this was the fact that he's started more games as an Eagle than any other player in history. And it's not that he had started more games as an Eagle, that I knew, but the fact that he was the second place guy is Chuck Bednarik. Dawkins started 182 games as an Eagle. Bednarik is down at 166, which is 16 games. That's an entire NFL season more than Chuck Bednarik. So the fact that he started that many more games really, I think, sort of stands out and is amazing to me. About Chuck Bednarik and Brian Dawkins, it really makes me think and reflect on the history of this franchise. And one of the things I love about it, and one of the things I love about Eagles fans, is we love our defense. And if you were really going to create a Mount Rushmore of Eagles greats, who were the four greatest Eagles in history, the fourth one, I think there can be some argument over, but there's three that are absolutes, that are absolutely going on that Mount Rushmore. And that is Chuck Bednarik, Reggie White, and Brian Dawkins. All three of those guys were great defensive stars. And I think it really underscores just how good this franchise has been over the course of its history at the defense and on the defensive side of the ball. And Brian Dawkins is one of those greats that I think really needs to get named as one of the greats in team history. As the fourth person, People can argue over that. Depending on what day you ask me, I'm probably going to go with a different response. But if you have thoughts, go ahead and leave them in the comments below as to who you think the 4 greatest Eagles are of all time on any side of the ball, any position, whatever. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you have memories of Brian Dawkins that you really want to share, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I think we can all agree that he's certainly one of the greatest players in Eagles history and one of the best players in the NFL, probably in the last 25 years. So for that, my hat's off to Brian Dawkins. Congratulations on him getting into the Hall of Fame this year. It's absolutely deserved, and I'll look forward to watching his speech tomorrow and really see. I'm sure he's going to be emotional because just the guy he was and the player he was, I'm sure he's going to bring the emotion to that speech as well. So I'm looking forward to that. Like I said, leave your comments below and let me know what you think. I'll be check in at least once between now and when the regular season starts as we talk about, the Eagles defending their title and what it means. I'm not going to do any really breakdowns of the preseason games. If there's something really interesting, I might comment on it, but I'm going to try and check in at least once between now and the start of the regular season. And then, of course, once that first game approaches against the Atlanta Falcons, I'll start back up with my prediction videos. Until then, fly Eagles fly.